Welcome back, travelers, to Legendary Lore, where today we are going to be going over the story of Old Capenna. Basically, everything that happened right up until the point where New Capenna was the main thing of the plane of Capenna. So, basically, what we start off with is this idea that there's a world that is completely forgotten to everyone in the city. No one remembers because of this enchantment that's been placed over it. But we do have some snippets of what actually happened. It had its own cultures, it had its kings, it had cities, it was everything, right? But it was destroyed after the whole thing happened with the Phyrexians. And that's what we're talking about today. And so our story begins, in this particular case, with the archangels being essentially the main protectors of original Old Capenna, right? And then you have a whole bunch of people that happen to just be around during that time. And it's at that point the Phyrexians show up and they just start wrecking everything. This is, of course, the old Phyrexians, Yawgmoth's Phyrexians. And they show up and they start wrecking everything. They're taking over everything. They're infecting people. They're experimenting on people. Everything's happening and it's all terrible. But then they realize that there's a chance, there's a hope. Because the angels, while they've been doing everything they can to fight them off, and they've actually been able to maintain a bastion, essentially, there's still the fact that Phyrexians take those that die and then repurpose them into additional soldiers for their armies. So it doesn't really work the way they would want it to otherwise. So as basically every member of the entirety of the species, of like every living being, sentient individual on Capenna was working together to build this tower, you had the archangels and the archdemons working together because they realized that there was an evil force that was greater than them. Of course, the demons themselves knew that they could possibly get something out of this deal if they could, because obviously they need mortal souls if they want to be able to basically control people. They want to be able to gain more power. They can't manipulate anyone if everybody's dead or Phyrexian, which have no souls, apparently. So looking into it, you have this whole deal with the New Capenna. It's been built, the angels and demons and some of the warriors are all protecting everybody. They eventually get inside New Capenna. Everybody's celebrating except for the angels because the Phyrexians are still outside. The Phyrexians are still trying to get inside, and they know that the city's architects, while they know what they did, they knew they were able to stop things, they knew that it wasn't over. And so basically the archangels are trying to figure things out, and the archdemons are thinking exactly what they're going to do. They know that they can basically have this gambit where they'll be able to capture the angels. You see, for some reason, the angels of New Capenna have this effect on Phyrexians, where their mere presence was causing the Phyrexians to basically degrade, and generally just, they couldn't fight them as well. It was like a divine natural weapon. And so they thought to themselves, well, if we could just capture that angel essence, that halo around them, then we'd be able to fight back against the Phyrexians in a much more controlled capacity, and we wouldn't have to deal with angels anymore. It's a win-win for the demons. And so they begin to go towards other Capennans, the mortal Capennans, and they say, hey, if we trap the angels, we can get this and that out of them. It's going to be great. And so basically what happens is the archdemons, they find 5 mortal champions. And they're very minor characters. They're they're not very influential. They're more petty aristocrats than anything else. And so they find them. Rafine, which is a controversial fortune teller. She's the Sphinx. She basically believed that there was going to be this huge prophecy coming and that she was going to be a big part of it. And obviously that's starting to come together as the demons are like, it's now is the time. And so Lord Xander, you had him. He was a sick old artist. And he was basically the last of his group in his aristocratic house. And he's basically looking at all his peers essentially that are doing so much better than he is. And then you have Ziatora. And she was just a young dragon. She's basically like the leader of a bunch of bandits. And all she did was fight people, and that's what she wanted to do. She just wanted to fight and get stronger. Then you had Jetmir. And Jetmir he was a party boy who joined the hermits, like the druids. But then he didn't really want to be a hermit druid because that meant there was no time for parties. And so he would always be partying despite the fact that he had these druidic powers. And so all 4 of these guys are specifically chosen by this 5th guy named Falco. Falco is, of course, the Bant-based one, the broker, eventually. And he's the one who comes up with the contract, and he sets it all up. And so basically, once all 5 of the shards of New Capenna are being divvied up between these 5 people, the archdemons make the deal. And they essentially fuse with the other 5, with the 5 leaders. And while that's not technically mentioned, all it says is that the archdemons are aloof or they're far away. That's all they really say. But I mean, why would they just give their powers just to them? It makes more sense for them to have fused with these characters. But they are demonic hybrids in the end, and they're basically able to capture and contain the angels. And it's described them as being in stasis. And it's usually in the artwork, you've seen that they've come out of these statues, essentially. But as far as the modern Capenna, there are no angels. They're all trapped, and there's no way to figure out where they are or where they came from. But basically, they took advantage of this sudden slumber that hit the Phyrexians. And it can go back, we haven't really covered it to its fullest extent, but there was a point where Gerard, with the legacy and everything, and Weatherlight and Karn and Urza, they all together, they were able to do something that is completely different from right now, but it was basically this huge shockwave that went throughout the entire multiverse, apparently, and every Phyrexian was affected. And here we have them suddenly slumbering. They basically all pass out, and it's during this point in time that they're able to go and they're able to actually capture the archangels, and they start everything up, and everything basically turns into this new world. And so in the modern era, you have all of the 5 families, the 5 families of those 5 people that were basically nobodies, that were all gathered together, and they started up their own little chunks of everything. All of those things, each different family, we're actually going to cover in their own unique episodes. But suffice to say, basically, everything that's happening, these 5 groups, none of them are the government. Unlike in Ravnica, where the 10 guilds are the essential government or government sections of those different places. No, here it's 5 crime families. They know they're crime families, and they know they commit crimes. And there is no actual law. It's mainly just agreements of, I'm not going to do too many bad things. I'm going to do bad things in this area. And if I do a bad thing that you don't like, you can do bad things to my guys. That's the basic, thing they have. They function entirely on respect and the fact that they all have essentially the ability to take the others out if they felt like it. But an all-out war would mean destruction for Capenna. And so that's where there's this uneasy alliance. There's technically a government, but it doesn't even get named, which I find hilarious, that the government is so useless and so inconsequential that it doesn't actually matter. Now, all of that said, the actual mortals of the plane that aren't the demons, and even actually the demons themselves, they don't remember old Capenna. They don't remember the Phyrexians. There's statues everywhere that show angels and Phyrexians fighting and stuff like that. They don't remember what Phyrexians are. They just see these grotesque monsters like gargoyles, and they're like, oh, that's weird. Cool. Okay. But there's actually just basically this mass amnesia. And apparently what happens is that the way that it's set up is that even if they're told directly about it, they kind of just blow it off. It's kind of like a perception filter kind of thing, where it just means it's not important. So people actually still sometimes show up from old Capenna. They come up in the elevator, they show up there, and they're all ragged, and they're talking about Phyrexians and how they were surviving, because apparently the Phyrexians are still around. They just can't get up. So they're all like, oh, the Phyrexians, they were attacking us and it was horrible. And the people are like, want some Halo? Tastes great. So it's really interesting, because thanks to that little tidbit, we know that Elspeth is not some super ancient planeswalker because of the whole shift from old to new. No, Elspeth was just one of those people that lived out in the wastes, and then was being forced to experiment on other people. She was the one choosing who got taken away by the Phyrexians. Extremely traumatizing event for her, but basically she was out there in that world while people were out in New Capenna partying. She was suffering in a cage somewhere. And so there's just this really weird dichotomy between that and all that going on. And so basically all together, we have the Halo running out, and they don't know why. And I do want to point out that the way Halo is described is a viscous, divine, oil-like fluid. And I like the fact that they call it an oil-like fluid, because that means it's basically anti-oil. It's the anti-version of the Phyrexian contagion. And that's just a really cool idea to me, of the way that they have the dark oil versus this rainbow colored stuff that's able to actually counteract it. And I do think that that's going to be important later in the future. But as far as things go, you have three major chunks. You have the Caldaya, which is the bottom. That's where all the workers essentially live. And there's the forge, and you have the infrastructure basically being built in the Caldaya. Right above that, you have the Mezio. The Mezio is like just the normal city stuff, the stuff that you would find just going around a normal town. You got the shops and everything, just normal stuff, normal people. And then you have basically the top of the top, and that would be the Park Heights location. That's basically where all the bosses live. All 5 bosses and a lot of the brokers, all the stuff will actually go into like where each of the different groups are kept, where they are stationed essentially. But yeah, you have these 3 different strata, and what's cool is because it's this giant tower, the giant tower city, they're able to actually look down and they can see everything happening like below them. So there's actually scenes throughout the story. We actually already covered a story where they're on an elevator on a train, and there were 3 trains, and they're basically all stacked up, but if you look down you can see the Caldaya below you, and everything was just kind of going in those different directions. So stuff like that. It's really cool how they kind of have a very literal sense of the strata created from society, of there's the high class and the lower class and then the mid class, and they're all existing on literal planes like that. And one just last weird thing, apparently they have docks, so that means they must have bodies of water, which means that they have giant bodies of water. They have a kraken they imported into the lake because why not? Because apparently I guess they went out into the old Capenna, found a kraken, fished it out, and just plopped it down into a lake, and they're like, yep, that's there now, it's authentic, it's a kraken, great job, we did it. So the place is crazy. It's got all sorts of stuff going on, and I love this plane. It's just got so much fun stuff going on in it. I would never want to live there, maybe visit, but that's beside the point. Until next time, where we'll be going over the next group, the Rivadier specifically. Thank you guys for watching, and travel well.